Hello, this is Grant Ramsey from the Institute of Philosophy at KU Leuven. Today I'm going to be considering this question: what is human nature? This is, of course, an old question, one going back to the dawn of philosophy and science, and there have been countless books published on the topic. For example, Thomas Aquinas on human nature. Here we have 12 theories of human nature: Confucianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. There are biological takes on human nature. There are anthropological critiques of biological takes on human nature. There are psychological accounts, the subtitle being The Modern Denial of Human Nature. Some prefer to talk not of human nature, but of human natures in the plural. And if we look at the popular media, in this case the New York Times, we see human nature being used in ways like this. The problem with fixing WhatsApp: human nature might get in the way, or blame human nature, not guns. Now, you might think these uses are problematic, that we should argue for a kind of elimination. The alternative is to say, well, let's try and ground such usages in a rigorous way. And that's what I'll be doing today, is trying to come up with a concept of human nature that can make sense of such uses, but also link human nature with the human sciences. An important distinction to start with is that between normative and descriptive accounts of human nature. Normative accounts are not about what humans are like, but about how humans ought to be, whereas descriptive accounts are about what humans are like, how and why we do what we do. One benefit of normative accounts is that they offer a target at which to aim. Because they're not just a description of who we are, they provide a target for our actions. But one big question with the normative account of human nature is, well, how do we learn about human nature? The answer is often obtained by pointing to particular texts, sacred texts like the Bhagavad Gita or the Holy Bible, or perhaps we might think that human nature can be extracted from Russian literature. So, in summary, with the normative approaches to human nature, the good is that it compels us to imagine what we want to be and can provide a target for our actions. The drawbacks include that human nature is fundamentally interpretive because of its textual basis. It's difficult to justify particular text or interpretations, and this makes the normative force weak. Because of this, I think it's best to look into the descriptive accounts, especially if we want to ground human nature references with the human sciences. So the descriptive accounts are about what we're like. And one intuitive way of trying to articulate human nature in this descriptive account is to think that, well, we're made up of traits. Some of these traits are part of our nature and some aren't. And an account of human nature is an account of sorting these traits into the human nature bin and the non-human nature bin. So I call this the trait and bin approach. So what I'd like to argue today is that the human nature is a rather impoverished account of human nature, the trait bin approach, and that it's better to think not in terms of a bin of traits, but in terms of how the traits are related to one another in what I'm calling the trait cluster approach. I should mention that trait picks out really any feature of a life history, no matter its duration or significance. So to get a better contrast between the trait cluster and trait bin approach, consider the night sky. What is the nature of the night sky? Well, if we asked a star bin theorist what the nature of the night sky is, what they would do is they would create a list of a subset of the stars, let's say the brightest stars. And then they would say, well, sky nature is about the brightest stars. So it's a list of stars. Whereas the star cluster approach would be to consider the patterns through which the stars, with which the stars are related to one another. So these are patterns at all scales, the constellations that we're familiar with, but at larger and smaller scales as well. So what I'd like to do is to argue that just as the star cluster approach is more informative of the night sky than, say, a list of bright stars, looking at the way in which traits are clustered over life histories is also a more useful way than thinking in terms of bins of traits. So if we think of a life history, say an individual being born and then living its life and dying, here we have just two traits on this life history. Of course, any life has countless traits, but here we have an antecedent trait and a consequent trait. And this is for the particular life that an individual lives, but of course an individual could live a variety of lives. There are many possible lives each of us could have lived. And if we were to add all of the traits to this set of life histories, then it would be as complex as the night sky. And so the idea is that from just as articulating the patterns in the sky is the best way to understand the sky's nature, the best way of understanding human nature is to capture the patterns of trait expressions over life histories. From these sets of life histories, we can extract human nature as well as individual nature and what I call uniquely human nature. So individual nature is the pattern of trait clusters within the individual set of possible life histories. Human nature is the pattern of trait clusters within the totality of extant human possible life histories. And uniquely human nature is the subset of human nature unique to Homo sapiens. So returning to this set of life histories, claims like public speaking lead to elevated cortisol levels are really claims about how traits are distributed over possible life histories. So here we have public speaking being this antecedent trait, and then elevated cortisol levels being a consequent trait. The same with benzene exposure leads to elevated cancer rates. These are, again, claims about patterns of trait expression over life histories. Interestingly, the degree to which animal models are informative for human medicine is the degree to which the trait clusters that we find in these animals is the same as humans within the domain in question. So we often say, well, it's natural to be aggressive or selfish. It's human nature to be altruistic. Humans naturally steal or naturally are generous. These kind of statements, I think, are within this trait cluster account are not very informative. It's not so much that they're problematic, but they're mere existential statements. That's to say that these traits exist. What's more informative is to point out patterns of trait expression. So it is natural for A's to C, or it is human nature for A's to C, or humans who A naturally C. In conclusion, I've argued that it's problematic to understand human nature as normative or as merely a bin of traits. Instead, understood as patterns of trait expression, human nature is empirically accessible, and it's the subject of the human, psychological, anthropological, economic, biological, etc. sciences. I know this was very quick. If you want a deeper dive into my account of human nature, you can read my book, Human Nature, that is free to download, or you can go to my website where I have some other articles on human nature. Thank you.